You know, every great story has a beginning. But sometimes, that beginning is a real trial by fire. Today, we're diving into the crucible that forged the patriarch Abraham, a story of crisis and faith that happened long before any divine covenant was even on the table.
So let's just jump right into the middle of the chaos. Divine judgment is just come crashing down. An altar is destroyed, a priest is dead. Now, this single dramatic moment, it's the climax of one crisis for Abraham, but really, it's just the opening act of a much bigger story about survival in a land under judgment.
Long before Abraham was known as the father of nations, he was just a man, frankly, caught between a rock and a hard place. He was facing two massive threats at once. First, a force of nature, a famine that was wiping everything out. And second, something deeply personal, a bitter persecution that was threatening his very life.
Okay, so first up, this famine, a truly terrible famine, which the Lord had actually prophesied, comes down on the land of Chaldea. So this wasn't some random disaster, nope. It was the fulfillment of a divine warning given directly to Abraham, and it turned the entire region into a landscape of suffering.
Now, as if widespread starvation wasn't enough to deal with, Abraham was also facing intense opposition from people. He was basically a wanted man, hunted not by strangers, but by the very people who should have been protecting him. He was fighting a war on two fronts, one for food and the other just to stay alive.
So who was behind this persecution? I mean, who was making his life so difficult? The answer, well, it's a gut punch. It wasn't a king or some rival priest. It was his own father, Terah. And we're not talking about a simple disagreement here. This was a betrayal of the deepest, most painful kind.
Just listen to the words here. They are staggering. Abraham says his father had determined to kill him. A plan was in place. So what could possibly stop that? Well, only the extreme agony of the famine. It was only when Terah himself was, quote, sorely tormented by starvation that he finally had a change of heart and gave up on his murderous plan. Okay, let's just pause for a second. Put yourself in his shoes. Your community is literally starving to death, and your own father is trying to kill you. What do you focus on? Survival? Getting out of there? It's a fascinating question, and Abraham's answer, it reveals everything about what truly mattered to him. Because in the middle of all this turmoil, Abraham's biggest worry wasn't just his own safety. He was on a secret mission, one he believed held the key to the future. He had to protect a set of sacred documents. You know, the timing of him saying this is so incredibly revealing. He literally interrupts his own harrowing story about famine and persecution just to make this point. He was overjoyed that despite everything, these records were safe. That tells you two things. One, they were in grave danger, and two, protecting them was his absolute #1 priority. And we're not talking about just any old scrolls here. These were the real deal. They contain knowledge of the beginning of creation, a complete historical timeline from Adam all the way down to his own time, and even what we'd call scientific knowledge about the planets and stars. This was the inheritance of humanity, and he saw himself as its guardian. So, while Abraham is laser-focused on preserving the records of the past, this whole crisis is actively reshaping the future of his own family. The famine didn't just test their faith, it took lives, and that set the stage for a dramatic new beginning. And this famine had a real human cost. It was so severe that it claimed the life of Abraham's brother, Haran. This tragedy, of course, left a huge hole in the family, but it also created an opportunity for its entire structure to be redefined. Haran left behind 3 grown children, his daughters Sarai and Milcah, and his son Lot. Suddenly, they were orphans in a land of starvation, and their futures were completely up in the air. And this right here is the crucial turning point. Their grandfather, Terah, the same man who just a short time before had tried to kill Abraham, legally adopts them. Now, in that ancient culture, this was way more than just a nice gesture. It was a formal legal act. It elevated them from the status of grandchildren to his own children, giving them all the rights and status that came with it. This legal shift is the key to everything that happens next. So out of the ashes of this tragedy, new bonds start to form. The family, which had been broken by death and betrayal, begins to rebuild itself through 2 foundational marriages that would literally change the course of history. Abraham ends up marrying his niece, Sarai, and his brother Nahor marries his niece, Milcah. And look, while marrying close relatives was more common back then, these unions were about something more.
They were about consolidating and strengthening a family that had been pushed right to the edge.
And that adoption? It solves one of the big head-scratchers in the Bible. Because later on, Abraham famously refers to Sarai as his sister. And guess what? He wasn't lying. She was his father's daughter, by adoption. So she was his niece by blood, but his sister by law.
And it's the exact same logic for his nephew Lot. Through that same adoption, Lot also became Abraham's legal brother. You see? This complete reframing of their family relationships was absolutely central to who they were from that point on.
So what was the end result of all this? The famine, the persecution, the death. It was actually incredible strength. What started in chaos ended in the formation of two powerful family lines. These were not unions of weakness. They were unions built on resilience and purpose. And this isn't an exaggeration. The families of Abraham and Sarai and Nahor and Milcah became the wellspring for future nations. From these two unions, forged in that Chaldean crucible, came the prophets and patriarchs that would define thousands of years of history. It's just incredible.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on, doesn't it? Abraham's story shows us a man whose defining strengths were born from his deepest trials: famine, betrayal, loss. It just makes you wonder, how often in our own lives are our most enduring foundations built not in times of peace, but right in the heart of the crucible?